Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you my very first Fear Street book review. A couple months ago, before I read my very first Fear Street book, I was on the fence whether I wanted to do video reviews of these books on camera. And when I read my first book, I realized that I don't want to keep opening up rabbit holes that are going to take me forever to finish. So I decided just to do Fear Street shorts. Which is just me covering the books casually as I read through them for the first time. But then I came across this book as my second Fear Street I've ever read. And it was so amazing that I felt like, okay, maybe I can branch out from Fear Street shorts from time to time. Whenever I find an absolutely amazing one, I'll make a review. Or if I find a terrible one, I'll make a review. Just because I might have more to unpack. But this one was absolutely fantastic. This one was recommended to me by the fellow YouTuber Monster Blood. He's a great guy, great friend of mine. He told me how different this book was compared to the rest of the franchise. So I thought, why not start here before I go any further? Because if this one's not like the other books, I'm not really spoiling myself with anything, right? And I'm glad I took that route because I found one of my favorite R.L. Stine books ever. And the book in question comes from the original Fear Street run. It's the final book. I don't know the number. It might be like 51 or something. But it's Trapped. Trapped. I'll say this. If you haven't watched my short, this is one of the best R.L. Stine books I have ever read before. And I mean that genuinely. R.L. Stine has a gift sometimes where he can build a story, bring the exposition, bring the atmosphere, bring the Prouse in the story, establishing a bigger cast of characters more so than just cardboard cutout caricatures, and actually develop them in a subtle and smart way throughout a story. And that's welcome, right? But what makes this book pop, in my opinion, is the shift away from the typical typecast that these Fear Street books get put into. These are young adult mystery thriller books. You might have some deviations into the supernatural, like this book, every once in a while. But it's not like, Monster of the Week, or whatever the case may be, for Goosebumps, or other series that R.L. Stine has done. I would say that, after reading this book, I can see how he kind of blended Goosebumps and Fear Street in the Nightmare Room. And that kind of makes me appreciate that series a little more. But I'm getting on a tangent here. I just have to say, what he was able to bring with the villain of the story. And how he was able to create a movie-like vibe going on. Where you feel like you're reading a horror film. And everything just ties together perfectly by the end. This is just a fantastic book. If you've never read a single R.L. Stine book or a Fear Street book, you can start here. Like I said, it's an outlier. This is not like the other books. You're not going to spoil yourself. Do yourself a favor. If you don't own this one and maybe you are a Fear Street fan, try this one out. Seriously, you're missing out. Okay? Yeah, fans of Goosebumps. Maybe you're thinking about graduating from middle grade horror and you kind of want to try young adult. This will be a fantastic first one to jump into. Especially if you're a fan of R.L. Stine and more accustomed to his writing. This is a fantastic, fantastic book. Okay? So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. I love this story. Okay? So, the main character is named Elaine. Elaine is this B-plus student. And she is a goody two-shoes. She often, forgets to turn in homework in one of her classes because, she's always so, ingrained in her homework that sometimes she forgets a class or two. In this one class, she's forgotten to turn in homework twice. And it's now the third time where she's forgotten to turn in an assignment. So her teacher has given her detention. But at Shadyside High, the high school that she goes to, detention is coordinated by the principal, which is named Principal Savage, to be on Saturdays. So Elaine, this is her first detention ever, and she has to go to Saturday detention at her high school. And she's very uncomfortable She's the last one to arrive. Principal Savage lets her through the door, and she gets guided over to this room. And very quickly, you're starting to see a lot of John Hughes's The Breakfast Club in the heart of this book. There's a group of 5 teenagers, including Elaine, that are all going to be experiencing this story. So Elaine gets thrown to the wolves, essentially, inside of this room, and she meets these 4 other kids. There's a group of 3 that are kind of like hoodlums that like to get into trouble, that are pretty much repeat offenders, that don't learn right from wrong. They don't really have nothing else better to do than cause mischief. You have one girl named Darlene. The other kid is named Max, who is kind of like the secondary toady to the leader, whose name is Bo. And then this other boy, I want to say his name is Jerry. And Jerry is there because he didn't want to perform a frog dissection in biology class. So Elaine is there. She feels out of place. Bo and his group of friends are pretty much tormenting her, hazing her, trying to get her to feel uncomfortable. And Elaine is kind of struggling with this. There's no inner monologue, I should bring that up. This is pretty much told in first person, but occasionally Stein will throw in some first person without warning to kind of shoo in Elaine's, thoughts in the moment. So while Elaine's getting to know these kids, there comes a moment where Principal Savage comes in, kind of like the principal from Breakfast Club, and the principal wants to make an example out of the most out there person in the room, which is Bo. And Bo is automatically given another Saturday detention, and the whole setup is pretty much like the Breakfast Club, where he's going to leave these kids in there after making an example out of Bo, and the kids are going to get bored and want to pretty much leave the room. So when Principal Savage leaves, Bo and his toadies say, hey, we're going to try to ditch this popsicle stand. We're going to go try to get some snacks from the cafeteria. Are you two down? Talking to Jerry and Elaine. And they agree, and they all head to the cafeteria. And in the cafeteria, they're eating some snacks. They're kind of indulging, with the edible cafeteria food that doesn't have to be cooked or anything. And while they're talking, they're establishing, some personalities here. They think they hear Principal Savage, so they get the urge to kind of run away. And the idea was originally to go back to the room, but then they were like, well, he's going to know that we've been gone, and we're going to get in more trouble. We're going to get more Saturday detentions. And Elaine is more afraid about her permanent record because she wants to have a good record. She wants to go to college at some point. She wants to have a future. So she realizes at this point that she's already given in to them this much. She's pretty much going to get another detention if she gets caught anyway. So she gets the idea to take the whole group to the auditorium, which is nearby. So they all head to the auditorium, and Elaine seems to know the auditorium. She kind of gives some hints that she, might be a theater kid or something. And she takes them to the stage, and Elaine, drops them off, and she's going to look for a very dark place to go hide. And while she's doing that, she falls through a piece of plywood on the stage with the stepladder nearby it. And it turns out to be about a 20-foot drop down to this tunnel below the soundstage. And she twists her ankle really bad, and she's screaming for help. It's pitch black down there. She can't see anything. And the kids come to their rescue. Bo and his toadies and Jerry all come down the ladder to see what's going on. And Bo, there is a scene early on. Bo has this arbitrage of weapons going on. He has like a switchblade he tries to throw at Principal Savage, and the kids scold him for trying, almost killing the principal potentially. He is that kind of kid. But he also has lighter fluid on him, and he's like, well, let's make, some torches. He grabs a piece of wood and some old tattered clothes down at the bottom, and he wraps it, puts some lighter fluid on, catches it on fire, and they all see this writing on the wall in the tunnel that says, let's party. And Bo is immediately reminded of what these tunnels are, and he pretty much tells a legend that he heard about the school that a long time ago, back during the Cold War, Shadyside, built the school, and they built bomb shelters underneath in case there was a nuclear holocaust. Well, the kids, since it was going unused and the tunnels had pretty much freeze-dried food that would never expire and stuff like that. They have mini rations that mostly got eaten up by the rats, but at the time there was a lot of it. They decided, why not go down there and make it their hangout? And the teenagers would often throw parties. And so the legend goes, some teenagers died in the tunnels years ago, and this creeps everybody out, and Bo gets his bright idea to go exploring around the tunnels because it beats going back up the ladder, trying to get back into the classroom and getting punished by Principal Savage. So Elaine decides, you know what, let's live in the moment a little. You know, she's always uptight. Why not go along with this plan? What have they got to lose at this point? It is pitch black, but it's kind of exhilarating. And she has a story that she can kind of share with her peers that makes her look cool. So she kind of has that Carly Beth side to her from The Haunted Mask, where she just wants to live life on the other side. You know what I mean? So she's going through that struggle. So the teens, they go through the tunnel, and they get lost in this labyrinth maze of sorts. And they start to panic a little bit, and they end up in this area somewhere in the labyrinth where there's like this pool, and there's this whole scene where Elaine and these kids are trying to cross this little thing above this like septic pool of like old water, and it smells to high heaven, and there's rats everywhere. There's a scene where Elaine falls in while she's trying to like, you know, maneuver her way around this, and she feels rats crawling on her skin underwater, and the water tastes putrid. It tastes vile, like sewage. It's disgusting. And she gets pulled out, and you know, she is shaken up. She's like, maybe we should try to get out of here. And the kids are like, yeah, that's a good idea, but we're lost. We don't know where we're going, so we might as well just push forward. And there's this whole thing where they almost lose their torches, but during the scuffle, they manage to bounce back a little bit. And they get across this septic pool, and they keep wandering in the labyrinth until they find this area that has a lot of trash and a lot of, you know, evidence that, hey, teenagers were once here. And they find this brick wall. And Bo, being the character he is, he's like, well, why is there a random wall of bricks here? Maybe there's something behind it. Somebody's trying to hide something back here. So Bo chips off one of the bricks, and when he does that, he opens it up, and then all of a sudden there's a sudden explosion that knocks all the kids back. Everybody, you know, is in a daze. They're all confused, and they see this red mist just floating around where the explosion happened. But the red mist doesn't disappear. And the kids are all, you know, coming to, and they're talking to each other saying, you know, why isn't this red mist doing anything? And it seems to be kind of warm. You can feel warmth from it. You can feel like sounds coming from it. And the mist goes over to one of the kids named Max. And when I say, I don't really want to spoil what this mist does to this kid, but it is brutal. It is brutal. It reminds me of Vecna from Stranger Things Season 4. If you know what Vecna is able to do to kids in Stranger Things Season 4, think of that, but with a red mist doing this. So essentially the red mist, you know, swallows up Max and does something horrific to him, right? And this scares the life out of Darlene and Elaine, and Bo is really upset and chases after this red mist as it carries Max off to wherever he's trying to go. So Bo up and disappears, and it's just Elaine, Darlene, and Jerry. And they get this idea that, you know, what they just saw was horrendous. They're not going to be able to survive. They need to go back and try to find a way out of here. And Elaine's like, no, we can't leave Bo here. We should go try to find Bo. And Elaine and Jerry are like, no, he's a lost cause. We're never going to be able to find him, right? So they try to find an escape route in the tunnel, and they end up, you know, coming to a conclusion at some point in the tunnel that maybe they should go and try to find Bo, because Bo might know where to go, because he has the lighter fluid. They'd have no torches. They have no light to work with. They're going to be pretty much, you know, doomed without him. So they turn back to get him, and they end up finding him. And Bo is like, run, he almost got me. We need to get out of here. And they bolt with the torch. They head back to near the area where they came down in. And then another scene happens with the kid named Jerry, and the red mist takes Jerry in a very, very dramatic, sad scene when Darlene and Elaine are trying to go up this ladder, right? So Jerry gets taken, right? I might be mistaken a few events, but I think that's what happened, right? But it's basically down to Bo, Darlene, and Elaine left. And Darlene at one point tried to shove Elaine from the ladder to go ahead of her. And Darlene is like, if I never shoved you, you could have died. And Elaine's like, well, if you never shoved me, you would have died. And they kind of come close with that. And Bo stops being this miscreant, troublemaker, and now has become this de facto leader of these two girls, saying that, I'm your protector. We're going to try to find a way out of this. And they come to the conclusion that the red mist is the biggest perplexion of this whole story. They figure that the latter way is not going to be a safe way to get out anymore, so they're going to have to find an alternate route. And they think that where the wall was, where the red mist was, that there might be an exit there. So they decide to go back and see if they can find a way through the hole in the bricks to get there. So they have to cross the cesspool again. They end up back through the wall. And while in the wall, they notice a tunnel. And the kids take this tunnel and they find this room filled with skeletons. And this is where the story gets very bizarre. So they're in this room. Darlene is scared out of her wits. Bo is like, okay, well, something happened here. This must be where the red mist killed everyone. And he seems to think that the red mist is behind it. But they see on the wall a name of somebody Savage. And they think that it's Principal Savage. And he might have something to do with the skeletons inside of this room. Well, the red mist makes its appearance known, comes in, possesses the skeletons, causes some mayhem. And the tunnel that they crawl through is starting to capsize a little bit. So it's becoming increasingly difficult to escape. And let's just say their torches go out. It's pitch black in there. And Elaine tries to book through the tunnel when Bo tries to create a distraction for him and for her and Darlene. And something tragic happens to Darlene off page. But as she's going through the tunnel, Elaine is trying to escape. She ends up getting confronted by Principal Savage. And Principal Savage and her help grab Bo from the clutches of the red mist. They end up outside of the brick wall area. And Principal Savage pretty much drops the ball about his involvement in this story. And the red mist makes its appearance again. And there's a big revelation about what the red mist is and how it ties to Principal Savage's story. And there might be a sacrifice of the principal at the end of the day. And the story pretty much ends after the dust settles, of Bo and Elaine just like happy to be out of the situation, and the story ends on a pretty gloomy yet optimistic note. And that's essentially Trapped, right? I try to keep it as vague as possible because it's very easy to spoil this book. It's very simple, linear, to the point, very concise, very airtight. There's not a lot of things that I could talk about without spoiling it outright for you. So, Trapped. I really have zero negatives with this book. I thought that everything about this book just worked. From the beginning, I know some people might complain about the exposition being quite long. This is only a 140-page book, and there is about 50 pages of exposition setting up these groups of teens, setting up Principal Savage, and kind of setting up what kind of characters you're going to be dealing with moving forward. Now, of course, there is a death count. There are characters that die. 3 of them do. All right. But there really, from the get-go, is 2 main characters. That is Elaine and Bo. And Bo starts off like a complete juvenile delinquent. He's kind of hateable. But over the story, he becomes really likable, very rootable. And he's pretty much the hero. Elaine, she's a goody two-shoes, kind of afraid to step out of her own skin and her own comfort zone. And she does give in to peer pressure, which could be kind of frustrating for some. But she does it in a realistic way. You know what I mean? She's like, I am kind of uptight. She kind of admits that to herself. You know what? I should live a little. This does beat getting in trouble. So she's very understandable in the decisions she makes in the story. And where she comes to in the end is also very harrowing. And I think she gets some development out of this too. I like all of the periphery characters as well. Principal Savage, Max, Darlene, Jerry, they all have their own quirks, and they bring something to the story, like a traditional 1980s horror movie. It really feels like that. So the cast is pretty much phenomenal. the atmosphere of Shadyside High here. This is a very small scale story, so everything is taking place pretty much in this room early on that they're in. They might go to the cafeteria room to grab some snacks, and then they might be in the auditorium for a little bit. But most of the story takes place in the tunnel system underneath the school. That used to be the old, bomb tunnels, bomb shelter tunnels. And it feels so claustrophobic. There's something about the story that's just eerie and unsettling. There's something about being in the dark and all the unknowns down there. It makes it very tense. It makes it that you don't know what's going to happen, because the way these tunnels are laid out are kind of maze-like, right? And that leads to the discovery of what this thing is down there in the tunnels. This red mist, it doesn't have a name, but you do learn by the end what this red mist is. And it involves something Principal Savage did in the past, down in the tunnels. I'll just leave it at that. What this mist does to these kids is outright terrifying. I think that the Red Mist is one of the most violent villains R.L. Stine has ever written. And there's something about him, like, I guess it's not really a him or her, but there's something about it where it will be in parts of the story, but you know it's looming. You kind of feel its presence there. It's kind of like a Michael Myers, like the original Halloween movie from 1978. You feel his presence, but he's not always there. But it feels the same way in this book. I don't know how Stine pulled that off, but it works, right? And the story it's telling might be kind of basic, but there's really no tangents to it. It's all straightforward. It's a simple mystery without too many legs going on. And everything that the book presents that possibly has questions around it has answers by the end. And it wraps up in such a gruesome way, but it's also, good to see the characters that do make it out, maybe the optimism to be had. And I love the way it ends, and I love where it ends, because it doesn't go beyond the point that the story needs to. It kind of ends pretty much as soon as the climax is over. And I love endings like that. It reminds me of a book that Robert Hirschfeld wrote in Spine Tinglers called Killer Computer. I love the way that ending wraps up, and I love it similarly here. It's a similar type of ending. So all in all, Trapped. This is one of the best R.L. Stine books I've ever read, genuinely. This has me excited to read more Fear Street in the future. If I had to rate this thing from a 0 to 5 star basis, easily, this gets an overwhelming 5 out of 5 stars for me. This is in my top 5 favorite R.L. Stine books I've ever read. It's up there with The Haunted Mask, Are You Terrified Yet?, They Call Me Creature, and Werewolf Skin. As a matter of fact, I think it might be right underneath Werewolf Skin as my second favorite R.L. Stine book I've ever read. And that's saying a lot. I think that this is a fantastic book. I know that Fear Street is not going to be like this moving forward, and I'm kind of sad. But if this is the zenith of the Fear Street franchise for me, I'm fine with that. And like I said, I'm excited to see what other books can bring for me. So that's my thoughts on Fear Street Trapped. Let me know down in the comment section if you've read this book. Do you love this? Do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.